Se ha dicho que nosotros enviamos armas a los revolucionarios salvadoreños y con toda la capacidad técnica norteamericana que la tienen, no han podido probarle a nadie que nosotros les enviamos armas a los salvadoreños. Entonces el señor Riga se arroga el derecho de enviarnos fuerzas militares a Nicaragua, a matar nicaragüenses. No es la primera vez que lo hacen los gobiernos imperialistas de los Estados Unidos. No es la primera vez. Y después que nuestro pueblo tome el poder y quiere construir su propio destino, que nos hemos liberado para siempre de tutelajes extranjeros, al señor Reagan no le gusta.
The Nicaraguan Revolution was the product of several decades of violence and disagreement among the Nicaraguan people. Two factions have been present ever since the country's independence in 1838. These two factions, known as the conservatives and liberals, were constantly battling for power. However, starting in the 20th century, the United States gave the conservatives an unfair advantage. In 1912, Conservative President Diaz asked for U.S. support against rising liberal opposition. He told the United States that the land holdings of the United Fruit Company would be jeopardized soon if there wasn't military intervention. The U.S. responded by sending the Navy and Marines to assert the conservatives' power. The U.S. occupied Nicaragua until 1927. At this time, the U.S. gave military control to the newly formed Nicaraguan army known as the National Guard, led by Anastasio Somoza Garcia. Over the next 10 years, Somoza eliminated any liberal opposition and anyone who could potentially stop him from becoming president. In 1937, Somoza rigged the Nicaraguan general election and became president. This was the start of a brutal dictatorship that lasted 43 years. Somoza lived in wealth and excess while his people starved. He oppressed and abused them heavily. In addition, throughout these 43 years, Somoza and later his two sons had the support of the U.S. government.
U.S. policy to Nicaragua was complex. By and large, the U.S. supported Somoza, but there were many moments in which the United States was opposed to his regime and tried to encourage him to either step aside or permit free elections, but to no avail.
The Nicaraguan Revolution began with the rise of leftist organization Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional, or Sandinista National Liberation Front, originally led by José Carlos Fonesa Amador, Silvio Mayorga, and Tomás Borge Martínez. The FSLN began the campaign of kidnapping throughout Nicaragua that was highly publicized by the Nicaraguan media and created the solidification of the FSLN as a political party. The Somoza regime, now led by Anastasio Sr.'s second son, Anastasio Somoza de Valle, used the highly trained Nicaraguan National Guard as a response to the FSLN. They used torture, executions, intimidation, and censorship of press in response. This led to the development of the conflict throughout the country as they began taking sides and becoming more violent. Then, the revolution hit its breaking point when the editor of the leftist newspaper, La Prensa, Pedro Joaquín Chamorro Cardenal, was murdered by suspected parts of the Somoza regime. His murder led to 30,000 people to begin rioting in the streets of Managua violently. This riot then grew throughout the country in more towns and villages. Then, as the violence continued to grow during early 1979, the Organization of American States began to try to hold supervised negotiations between the FSLN and the government. These negotiations then began to break down as it became clear that the Somoza regime was not going to allow free democratic elections to take place. Then, in that same year, in June, the FSLN gained full control of the country except for Managua. They held a stronghold outside the city. and eventually, on July 17, 1979, President Somoza gave in and allowed for the FSLN to take full control of the government as he resigned.
After the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, the United States responded to the revolution through CIA intervention. Ronald Reagan believed the FSLN was receiving direct support from the Soviet Union.
Thing in Central America is to give the first communist stronghold on the North American continent a green light to spread its poison throughout this free and increasingly democratic country.
Congress allowed the diversion of money to fund Somoza's National Guard, now exiled in neighboring Honduras. The CIA supplied these soldiers, now called Contras, with training and weapons. The Contras caused havoc on the Nicaraguan countryside. They were criticized heavily for using guerrilla warfare tactics such as torture and rape. In 1984, Congress stopped allowing funding of the Contras. However, the CIA funded them anyways through the selling of arms to the Iranians. This is known as the Iran-Contra scandal. The Contra Wars were extremely devastating to the Nicaraguan people. They lasted over 10 years and resulted in the deaths of 30,000 people.
The Contra War was truly ended by the 1990 Nicaraguan general election, in which Violeta Chamorro won the election as part of a coalition of anti-Sandinista parties that spanned from the left and right wings of the government. She led the country during the horrible aftermath of the Contra War, which left horrible economic, social, and cultural repercussions for Nicaragua. Then, in the next two general elections, the Sandinistas lost twice, to Arnaldo Alemán and Enrique Bolaños, both from the Constitutional Liberal Party. But both had very weak presidencies, which allowed for the Sandinistas to grow in power again, and finally, in 2006, to win the Nicaraguan general election, with Daniel Ortega at the head. In conclusion, the Nicaraguan Revolution was a fight for change only in name, not in ideas. The Nicaraguan Revolution merely allowed for a new group to take power, but still keep the same oppressive style of government as the one before. Both the Somozas and the Sandinistas dragged the Nicaraguan people through unnecessary wars to merely keep their corrupt positions and to better themselves, not the people as they had promised.